Rain pressed against the glass as Ethan Cole, 32, sat in the room his father used to call the heart of the house. Now it felt more like a tomb. The lawyer's voice cracked over the sound of thunder, reading words that sliced deeper than grief. To my son, Jason Cole, 35. I leave full control of my estate. Ethan blinked, waiting for his name, but it never came. His mother, Rebecca Cole, 58, didn't flinch. Jason leaned back with a smirk that said everything. Marianne Blake, 29, the woman Ethan once planned to marry, sat beside Jason, eyes low, fingers trembling around his hand. And in that instant, Ethan's world fell quiet. What kind of mother steals her dead husband's legacy from her own son? The clock ticked. The lawyer, Thomas Reed, 61, hesitated, his lips shaping words he seemed afraid to say. Something in his face didn't match the verdict, and when Ethan caught that flicker of guilt, he knew this wasn't over. Forge. The storm hadn't stopped when Ethan cornered Jason outside by the marble fountain. Water streamed down both their faces. Rain for Ethan, arrogance for Jason. You knew, Ethan said, voice shaking. Jason laughed. Dad made his choice, brother. You just never made yours. The words burned. Ethan wanted to believe there was some mistake, some forgivable reason. But Jason's smirk killed that hope. Behind them, the estate's lights glowed, like eyes watching two brothers become enemies. Inside the dining room, candles flickered across crystal glasses as Rebecca raised hers in a quiet toast. To new beginnings, she said, eyes gliding over Jason, not Ethan. The table glittered with untouched food, laughter sounding hollow in the cavernous room. Ethan stood in the doorway, invisible. His mother didn't even acknowledge him. She smiled like grief was a burden she'd sold. He turned away before his voice could break. Ethan slipped into his father's study after midnight. Dust floated like ghosts in the beam of his flashlight. He opened a drawer. Empty. Another. Empty. Then one last compartment clicked open, revealing a weathered leather journal bound with a cracked strap. His hands shook as he opened it. The handwriting was his father's, careful, familiar, alive. The first line read, "If you're reading this, Ethan, it means I failed to protect you." The next morning, Thomas arrived at Ethan's apartment by the docks, hat dripping rain. He looked exhausted, eyes red from sleeplessness. "There are things you don't know," he muttered, voice trembling. Ethan stared, unsure whether to trust him. "Then tell me," he said. Thomas hesitated. "Not yet. Not until I'm sure." He turned to leave, but in that brief moment, Ethan saw it, a recorder-shaped bulge in the lawyer's coat pocket. The sea was gray that morning, heavy with mist. Ethan stood on the edge of the dock, the journal open in his hands, the pages warped by damp air. His father's words kept echoing. "They will twist the truth if I let them." Waves slapped against the wood, steady and cruel, like time itself refusing to stop. Ethan felt the weight of it. The betrayal, the silence, the unanswered question that kept burning in his chest. If his father had known something, why hadn't anyone else heard it? Behind him, seagulls screamed like warnings. The world had shifted, and Ethan realized he couldn't grieve anymore. He had to dig, even if it meant destroying what was left of his family. He found her at the cafe near the courthouse, sitting alone, stirring coffee she never drank. Marianne's eyes widened when she saw him, guilt already written across her face. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "Then tell me why," he said quietly. For a moment, her mask fell away. "Jason said your father was changing the will. That he planned to give you everything. They made sure it never happened." The words hit him like a blade. She reached for his hand, but Ethan pulled back. There were no words left for love after betrayal that deep. That night, Jason showed up, uninvited. He didn't knock, just walked in like he still owned every space Ethan breathed in. You think you can dig around and not get burned? He said, voice low, teeth showing under his smirk. Ethan didn't answer. Jason stepped closer, finger in his face. Dad's gone. The money's mine. You start a war. You'll lose everything left. Ethan smiled faintly. I already did, for the first time. Jason's grin faltered. There was something different in Ethan now. Something Jason couldn't intimidate anymore. Thomas sat alone in his office long after the sun went down. The will papers lay scattered before him and on the desk, his recorder small and silent. He ran a trembling hand over it. He told me to keep it safe, he murmured, remembering David's voice the night before he died. But guilt eats slower than truth. When Ethan knocked on his door, Thomas froze. He couldn't face him yet. Come back tomorrow, he said through the wood. Ethan's footsteps faded, leaving only the soft hum of rain and the ticking clock counting down to exposure. Back in the study, Ethan traced the journal's binding again. Something felt uneven inside. He pulled at the lining and a small brass key slid out, cold against his palm. His pulse quickened. On the inside cover, a final scribble caught his eye. Truth stays locked until trust is earned. The handwriting faltered as if written in pain. Ethan looked toward the old cabinet near the window, the one his father never let anyone touch. The storm outside picked up again, wind rattling the glass. He turned the key in his hand and whispered, What did you hide, Dad? The night smelled like rain and fear as Ethan slipped through the back door of Thomas Reed's law office. Every creak in the old floorboards felt like an accusation. The brass key he'd found fit the drawer perfectly. It turned with a slow, heavy click. Papers rustled in the darkness, but one object gleamed beneath them. A small black tape recorder, wrapped in an envelope with his father's handwriting. His chest tightened. He remembered that voice, the calm that used to make every storm bearable. Now, it was trapped inside that plastic box, waiting to speak one last truth. Ethan's hands trembled as he lifted the recorder. The envelope beneath it was brittle, corners yellowed with age. He tore it open and a note fell out. His father's handwriting again. If they change the will, this will change everything. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. He pressed play. Static filled the air. Then a voice. His father's, calm, slow, certain. If you're hearing this, it means the people closest to me have failed you. Ethan froze. Every word dug deeper. They took more than money, Ethan. They took your right to truth. He sat there for hours, listening to his father's voice unravel the story piece by piece. The investments, the bribes, the forged signature, all orchestrated by Jason and Rebecca. But it wasn't just business. It was betrayal dressed in family loyalty. I wanted to protect you, the tape said, but I trusted the wrong people. Ethan pressed his forehead against the desk, the sound of the rain outside syncing with his own heartbeat. His father's voice faltered near the end. If you can forgive them, you'll break the curse that built this family. Ethan's tears fell silently onto the wooden floor. When the tape ended, Ethan couldn't breathe. Every sound felt distant, muffled by grief and disbelief. His father had known everything, and died with it. The silence afterward was unbearable. He slammed his fist against the desk, the recorder skidding across the floor. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He whispered into the emptiness, but there was no answer. Only the faint hum of the recorder, as if it still held secrets he wasn't ready to hear. Outside, the wind howled, carrying away everything left of innocence. When dawn broke, Ethan stood in front of the window, eyes swollen but steady. The recorder sat in his pocket, heavier than any inheritance. He thought of Jason's smirk, Rebecca's cold stare, Marianne's guilt, and his father's voice calling him to something higher than revenge. You wanted me to forgive them, he murmured, but not before I show them what they did. He turned from the window, straightened his coat, and walked out. The sky was pale gold, the kind of light that comes only after a long, merciless night. The Cole estate looked smaller under morning light, its pride stripped bare. Ethan stood before his family in the grand hall, the recorder resting on the table between them. "I know everything," he said quietly. Jason laughed until Ethan pressed play. Their father's voice filled the room like thunder. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal spoken aloud. Rebecca's hand froze midair, wine glass trembling. Jason's smirk vanished. "You set us up," Rebecca whispered, voice cracking for the first time. "No," Ethan said. "You set yourselves up. Dad just left proof." The silence that followed was the kind only truth could build. Cold, final, irreversible. Jason lunged for the recorder, but Ethan caught his arm before it reached the table. "You think this changes anything?" Jason shouted. Face red, veins showing at his neck. "You'll still be nothing without me." Ethan's grip tightened. "Then why do you look scared?" For a second, Jason's eyes flickered with panic, then rage. "You ruined this family. I'll ruin you," he spat. Ethan released him, stepping back as Jason stumbled. "You already did," Ethan said. The words hung like smoke in the air, thick and bitter. Rebecca clutched the edge of the table as if the world itself were slipping. "Your father didn't understand," she said, her voice trembling between pride and fear. "He wanted to give it all to you, but he would have ruined everything we built." Ethan looked at her, tears in his eyes. "You built nothing, Mom. You just learned how to take." Her lips quivered, eyes darting away. For the first time, Ethan saw her not as his mother, but as a woman terrified of losing control. The queen without her crown. Marianne couldn't take it anymore. "Stop!" she cried, voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." She turned to Ethan, tears streaking her face. "I told Jason to stop, but he said your father would never know." Her words came out like shattered glass. Ethan's heart twisted, not from anger but from the memory of what they once were. "You were part of it," he said softly. "I was scared," she whispered. "We all were," Ethan nodded, voice breaking. "Fear doesn't excuse betrayal." She fell to her knees, sobbing as the recorder clicked off, leaving silence that felt like judgment itself. Thomas Reed arrived hours later, summoned by Ethan's call. He looked around the shattered family, the toppled glasses, the broken quiet. "You heard it?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded. Thomas's eyes filled with guilt. "He made me promise to protect that tape until you were ready," he whispered. "I thought I was helping." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did. Just not soon enough." Thomas sighed, voice breaking. "He loved you, Ethan. He just didn't know how to save you from them." Ethan's jaw tightened as he looked back at his mother and brother. Now strangers bound by truth they could never bury again. The courthouse smelled of dust and history, as if truth had been buried there too many times. Ethan sat beside his lawyer, eyes fixed on the papers before him. "You sure you want to do this?" the lawyer asked. "Once it's public, there's no going back." Ethan nodded. "They took everything. This time, I take the truth." Outside the window, the world looked calm, almost mocking. He could still hear his father's voice echoing in his mind, warning him, guiding him. Ethan exhaled slowly, the recorder resting in his pocket like a pulse. "Let's end this," he said. Jason adjusted his tie as he took the stand, the perfect picture of confidence, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside. The lawyer's questions came sharp as blades. "Did you forge your father's signature?" Jason smirked. "Of course not." Ethan watched from the bench, silent, his pulse steady. Then the lawyer played a clip from the tape, David's voice naming Jason and Rebecca directly. Jason froze. His throat twitched, his confidence shattered. "That's not real," he muttered. But the room had already turned against him. Ethan didn't smile. There was nothing victorious about truth. It just hurt slower. Rebecca's voice trembled as she took her turn. The judge's gavel sounded distant. "I only wanted to protect what was ours," she said. Hands clasped like a prayer. "Your husband trusted you," the lawyer pressed. Her lips quivered. "He trusted me too much." Her eyes darted toward Ethan, who stared back, empty of hatred, full of disbelief. A single tear traced her cheek. For the first time, she looked small, fragile, human. But even then, guilt didn't save her. The truth was heavier than her tears. When Thomas Reed took the stand, silence swept the courtroom. His voice was low, remorse woven through every word. "I knew about the forgery. I didn't stop it. I thought I could fix it quietly." The judge leaned forward. "And the recording?" Thomas looked at Ethan. "Mr. Cole asked me to make it his last insurance against the people he feared most." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jason bowed his head. Rebecca turned away. Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him, not from shock but from the final weight of confirmation. His father had trusted one man to save him, and that man had almost failed. The judge nodded to Ethan. "Mr. Cole, you may present your evidence." Ethan rose, recorder in hand. He pressed play. His father's voice filled the courtroom, calm, yet filled with sorrow. "If this reaches my son, then I have failed him in life. But maybe I can still give him truth." The room froze. Jason shut his eyes. Rebecca covered her mouth, and Thomas lowered his head. When the recording ended, Ethan placed it on the table and whispered, "That's my father's voice. The rest is yours to judge." The silence that followed felt holy, like justice breathing for the first time. The courtroom emptied slowly, but Jason didn't move. His face was gray, drained of everything that once made him untouchable. When the officers approached, he didn't resist, just stared at Ethan with hollow eyes. "You wanted the truth," he said quietly. "Now you've got it." Ethan didn't answer. Watching his brother in handcuffs didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss wearing justice's mask. As Jason was led away, he turned once more. "You'll never escape this family, Ethan. None of us do." The doors closed behind him with a final metallic echo that sounded like the end of everything. Rebecca sat in her empty parlor, once filled with polished glass and laughter that was never real. The curtains were drawn. The silence unbearable. Family portraits lined the wall. David smiling, the boys younger, all pretending to be whole. She reached out to touch one frame, her hand trembling. "I only wanted to keep us safe," she whispered. But the house didn't answer. She looked at her reflection in the window and saw the ghost of a woman who traded love for power and lost both. A single tear slipped down unnoticed, like the last fragment of a story that had nowhere left to go. The cemetery smelled of wet grass and salt from the sea. Ethan stood before his father's grave, the recorder in one hand, a single white flower in the other. "You were right," he said softly. "The truth doesn't save. It only frees." The wind tugged at his coat as he placed the flower down. "I did what you couldn't," he added, voice steady, "but I wish it hadn't cost this much." For the first time, he didn't feel anger, just quiet understanding. The kind that only comes when everything is already gone. Marianne met him at the pier one last time. The wind tossed her hair, the sky bruised with evening clouds. "Leaving town," she said quietly. "There's nothing left here." Ethan nodded, unable to hate her anymore. "I hope you find peace," he said. She smiled faintly. "You already have. That's what hurts most." They stood in silence until the ferry's horn broke the air. She touched his arm once, soft, final, and walked away. Ethan watched until her figure disappeared into the mist, another chapter closing without forgiveness, only understanding. Days later, a letter arrived at Ethan's small apartment. The handwriting was careful, trembling. I kept your father's secret too long, Thomas wrote. I thought silence would protect everyone, but it only buried the truth. I'm leaving my practice. Some things can't be fixed, only confessed. Ethan folded the letter, placing it beside the recorder. Outside, the tide rolled in and out, steady and merciful. He whispered, "We all did what we thought was right." But deep down, he knew his father's final message was never about justice. It was about release. The sun rose slow over the coast, gold spilling across the water like forgiveness taking shape. Ethan stood on his apartment balcony, the same place where grief once felt endless. Now, the silence was softer. He had started drafting again. Sketches for small homes, community spaces, things meant to shelter rather than impress. His father's words from the tape replayed in memory. Build something that lasts longer than money. Ethan smiled faintly. For the first time, he wasn't building for approval. He was building to heal. The morning breeze felt like a promise finally kept. Weeks later, Ethan returned to the Cole estate one last time. The halls echoed with his footsteps, the walls stripped of portraits, the air thick with ghosts of laughter and lies. He paused at his father's old office, running his fingers across the dust-covered desk. It was strange how something once so powerful could now feel so hollow. He locked the front door behind him and slipped a key under the mat. "Rest now," he whispered to the house. For the first time, it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like letting go. Back home, Ethan sat by the window overlooking the sea, sketches scattered across the table. He realized how far he'd come from the boy craving his family's approval. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled him. He thought about Jason, Rebecca, Marianne, how they had each chosen their path. Maybe redemption wasn't about forgiving others. Maybe it was about forgiving yourself for trusting them. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight ease from his shoulders. The world outside looked new again. He picked up the recorder one final time. The tape had begun to wear thin from so many plays, the sound faint but familiar. His father's voice drifted through the static, steady as ever. "You are stronger than what we became." Ethan closed his eyes, smiling through the ache. "You were right," he whispered, "but I had to lose everything to see it." He pressed stop, then opened the recorder and removed the tape. Instead of throwing it away, he placed it on the windowsill. Like a monument to truth, to pain, to love that had finally learned how to rest. Ethan walked along the shore as the tide rolled in, waves washing over his shoes. The wind carried a chill, but it felt alive. He looked toward the horizon, where the light broke through thick clouds, the kind of light that meant survival, not perfection. His life wasn't fixed, but it was his now. Every secret, every wound, every truth. It had all led here. "Thank you, Dad," he murmured, voice barely above the surf. And as the sea pulled the footprints behind him away, Ethan Cole walked forward, lighter than Hyde ever been.